Protestant historiography, summed up and disseminated by Max Weber's concept of the disenchantment of the world, and in Keith Thomas's 1971 book, Religion and the Decline of Magic and Scripture, and Duffy essentially completely undone that paradigm, although it's still the dominant one in popular understandings of the early politics. The Reformation, understood as a period of disenchantment of the world, out of Weber, sorry, didn't happen that way. Something very different happened. And some of this is happening precisely in the realm of demonology and literature. One might call my hypothesis the moral regulation or the moralization of enmity, such that what formerly had been perceived merely as superstitious rustics, credulously casting superstitious spells, or dark infidel brigands, Saladin, etc., or heretics, or Jews, gradually become servants of Satan, such that social, political, and religious conflicts were endowed with moral and eschatological significance, and therefore moral and eschatological impetus to act. Perhaps this could also help explain the steep early modern escalation of violence against religious others in general, in the wars of religion, in the 30 Years' War. And of course, one is reminded of Ronald Reagan's axis of evil and of the demonization of at least some Muslims in contemporary media discourse and politics. The processes of moral regulation underway in France, at least in the 15th century, seem, based on my research team's work, to have included as well a growing discourse about non-normative and non-matrimonial sexuality as being somehow enmeshed with diabolical forces. In previous centuries, European authorities had been content, generally, not always, to condemn and prosecute infidelity and sexual misbehavior as grave, but not capital sins, and generally to see them not as the result of diabolical action or temptation, but merely as the result of badly controlled lust, requiring purgation and penance, not purgation and burning. That was changing in the 15th century, as high scholastic theology, with its careful qualifications about demonic power, gave way to new and less orthodox ideas about how the devil might directly affect the physical world, a topic I discussed a bit last year here for the student conference, and how the devil might directly affect human beings, especially supposedly morally weak and lustful women, as medieval Christendom perceived women. This included a new and growing condemnation of sex workers and of their relations with powerful clans. It was around this time that medieval towns, rulers, and ecclesiastical authorities began to make sincere and serious efforts, finally. They've been talking about it for a long time, but doing nothing. But they finally began to make real efforts to close the thousands of brothels and bathhouses that had been a totally normal feature of medieval city life until the 15th century. Medieval society was also suffused with organic metaphors and similes drawn from familial and natural life. A monarch, for instance, was always a father, or perhaps a mother, to his or her people. It seems that marital infidelity was starting to be a hotter topic in popular literature and sermons, for example, in the 15th century, even in the 14th, think of the Fabio as well. And to refer not merely to family loyalty, but perhaps also to broader fields of loyalty and trust based on familial and matrimonial conceptual models or patterns. The work of my French colleague Jacques Chifordeau on the Arras case, also worked with a student on Mercier, and on some similar trials in this period, argues that many such episodes occurred as part of a campaign to shore up claims to sovereignty and power on the part of monarchs whose legitimacy was fundamentally in question. After all, dynastic authority was under threat all over Europe in the 15th century, whether in the 100 Years' War in France, in the War of the Roses in England, or the endless wars of the Italian peninsula, all of which, as you know, are rich lines for plot points and horrific violence of the Game of Thrones series. The Arras witch trials were indeed a kind of proxy war pitting the rebellious Dauphin of France, later Louis XI, and his patron, the equally rebellious Duke of Burgundy, Philip, against the Dauphin's father, Charles VII, King of France. Charles VII had kept his throne, and in the late 1420s was beating the English in the 100 Years' War with the assistance of Joan of Arc. Joan was, as you know, in the end burned state by the English, then allied against France with the Duke of Burgundy. Nobles who owed their primary allegiance to the Duke of Burgundy were involved in prosecuting Joan for witchcraft, then a relatively novel crime. And one of them, Philippe de Saveuse, was the father of the bastard Robert de Saveuse, captain of the bishop's police. Philippe played a role in bringing these charges against Joan, and Robert played the central role in bringing the charges against the witches of Arras. The moral regulation, then, of women, Joan on sexual grounds, the other gender grounds, the licensed, well-known prostitutes of Arras on all kinds of other grounds, couldn't seems then to have played some continued and charged part in these political dramas. Chiffreau's theory is that the state was suddenly prosecuting certain kinds of deviance or resistance to authority as treason, lèse majesté. I think that works for Arras trials, but mainly at the level of broad generality, because there are other things going on there to do with gender that he hasn't taken into account. And his theory might still work, but it needs to have gender included, otherwise it doesn't deal adequately with the evidence. I think that Sean Hires' theory that moral panics express crises in ongoing processes of moral regulation works much better to help us make sense of the Arras witch trials and perhaps also subsequent witch trials in general. I'm almost done. I very much like the idea that moral regulation is a long-term process, of which moral panics would be sporadic crises, but maybe also longer-term crises. There might be such a thing as a long-term crisis. This concept aptly describes many of the phenomena we've been observing. The absence of a liberal state, in the case of Arras, is less of a problem than one might think. In fact, I believe it allows us to extend the theory's validity out beyond the modern framework and look for ways in which processes of moral regulation, maybe even a la Norbert Elias, articulate with authority and power, and allows us to look for ways to see how moral panics as both crises or symptoms and as opportunities for agents of power to effect change and to impose new forms of control fit into that articulation in between crises and long-term processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have no doubt that you will have questions. I have so many. And thank you for taking a step here, which is quite new. Not one, but there is something new that you're bringing here, which is first the family, father and son, and personal connection, but also the